stop. Please stop." Those were the words that kept echoing in my head as I stood frozen in the middle of my kitchen, tears burning the corners of my eyes while my own son, my only child, looked at me like I was nothing more than an obstacle in his way. My name is Eleanor Hayes. I'm 72 years old, and tonight I'm sitting here trying to make sense of how the boy I raised with love, sacrifice, and endless forgiveness could look me in the eye and steal from me as though I were a stranger. If you're listening to me, if you've ever been betrayed by someone you gave your whole life to, please subscribe, like, and comment, because your story matters just like mine, and maybe telling it will help me feel less alone in this emptiness. My son Daniel had been in my kitchen only an hour earlier, the same kitchen where I used to bake him birthday cakes with frosting so thick his fingers would be sticky for days, the same kitchen where his father, Robert, would sit every Sunday, morning with his newspaper and coffee, teasing Daniel about the Chicago Cubs, and promising that one day they would see a World Series together. But Robert has been gone for only 7 months now, taken by a sudden heart attack that left me rattling around this house like a ghost. And tonight, Daniel ripped away the last thing I had that made me feel like Robert was still here with me. Robert's old Rolex, the one he'd saved months for back when we were barely scraping by. The one he wore every day of our marriage, the one I wound every single morning after he died, because the soft ticking made me feel like his heartbeat was still with me. That watch was not just a piece of metal, it was 45 years of marriage. It was the mornings Robert kissed my forehead before heading to his accounting job in downtown Chicago. It was the nights he took it off and placed it gently on the nightstand before climbing into bed beside me. It was my link to him, my ritual, my comfort. And now Daniel, my own son, stood in front of me with his arms crossed, smirking like a teenager caught sneaking out after curfew, and told me he'd sold it. Just like that. Sold his father's memory for $800 at some pawn shop down on Western Avenue, so he and his wife could have a little extra spending money for their trip to Italy. Italy, the country Robert and I had dreamed of visiting our entire lives, the trip we had promised ourselves we would take when we retired, the trip I had saved for and planned for decades. Now, instead of me, it was Daniel and his perfectly manicured wife Madison, boarding a plane tomorrow morning with the money from my husband's watch jingling in their pockets. "Mom, it was just a watch," Daniel had said, his voice dripping, with annoyance as though I were some senile old woman clinging to junk. "You need to get over it." Get over it. Tell me, how does a mother get over her son robbing her of the only tangible piece of his father she had left? How does she get over the cruel dismissal of her grief, the cold way her child looks at her and sees nothing but opportunity? I can still hear Madison's voice as she scrolled on her phone, not even bothering to look at me. Honestly, Eleanor, clinging to material things isn't healthy. Robert wouldn't want you living in the past. The audacity of it. This woman, who only knew my husband for 15 years, presuming to tell me what the man I spent almost 5 decades beside would or would not want. She's been doing that since the funeral, you know. Every time she came over with her fake smiles and her crocodile tears, she would find a way to slip in little comments about what Robert would want. And somehow those comments always involved me giving something up to make their lives easier. My son used to be gentle, thoughtful, quick to laugh, but somewhere along the line, Madison's hunger for bigger houses, fancier cars, designer handbags, and glamorous trips became his hunger, too, and I became nothing more than the wallet that never closed. As I stood there in that kitchen with the smell of dish soap still on my hands and the weight of betrayal crushing my chest, I told him I wanted the watch back, that I would go down to the pawn shop myself. He laughed, the way you laugh when, someone has no power anymore. "Go ahead, Mom, but it's already sold. Some guy came in this morning and paid cash." My knees almost gave out when he said that, because in that moment, I realized it wasn't just the watch that was gone. It was the boy I had rocked to sleep, the teenager I had driven to baseball practice, the young man Robert had hugged so proudly at his college graduation. That Daniel was gone, and in his place was this cold stranger who valued $800 more than his mother's heart. I remember the sound of the front door slamming, the hollow echo it left in the silence, and I collapsed into the chair by the window and sobbed until my chest ached. Grief, I had learned after Robert died, comes in waves. Some days it trickles in quietly, Other days, it slams into you like a storm. But betrayal is different. It has a taste. Bitter, metallic, like sucking on pennies until your tongue goes raw. That was the taste in my mouth that night. And as I sat there, rocking myself like some broken old woman, I realized something else. Daniel and Madison thought I was powerless. They thought they had beaten me down, that I would stay in my chair with my tears while they jetted off to Italy with stolen money. But they don't know me. They don't know what 40 years as a bank manager taught me about resilience, about strategy, about fighting back when life tries to bury you. They don't know that Robert didn't just leave me memories, he left me strength. And in that moment, as I wiped my tears and looked at the clock on the wall, I knew one thing with certainty: this fight was only beginning. The next morning I woke up with swollen eyes and a heaviness in my chest that felt like someone had laid a stone slab over me. But beneath that grief was a flicker of fire I hadn't felt in months, maybe even years, and I clung to it like a lifeline, because if I didn't fight for Robert's watch, then what was left of me would disappear too. I showered, dressed in a simple blue cardigan Robert had always liked, and drove across Chicago to the pawn shop Daniel had mentioned, a cramped place off Western Avenue with peeling red paint on the door and a neon sign that flickered cash for gold, like some cruel joke. I remember sitting in the car for a long time, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, wondering how I had gone from being a respected bank manager with hundreds of clients trusting me with their savings to an old widow begging a pawnbroker for the chance to buy back what was stolen from her by her own child. The bell above the door jingled when I walked in, and the man behind the counter looked up with weary eyes, his forearms covered in tattoos, and his expression the kind that told me he'd heard every sob story in the book. "You hear about the Rolex?" he asked before I even opened my mouth, and my heart stuttered in my chest because that meant Daniel had warned him I might come, had already written me off as some desperate old woman too sentimental to let go. "Yes," I whispered, my voice trembling. "It was my husband's. I'll pay whatever you want to get it back." The man, his name tag said Lenny, shifted uncomfortably and rubbed the back of his neck. "I'm sorry, lady. It's already sold. Guy came in yesterday, paid cash, no returns in this business." My knees went weak, and I had to grip the counter to steady myself. Someone out there, some stranger, was wearing Robert's watch, and the thought of it made me feel like he died all over again. But then Lenny leaned closer, lowering his voice. "We found something strange when we cleaned it up for sale. Hidden compartment in the back. Real professional job, had to be done by a jeweler. Inside was this." He reached under the counter and pulled out a small manila envelope, sliding it toward me like contraband. With shaking fingers, I opened it, and inside was a folded piece of yellowed paper. The handwriting was unmistakable. Robert's neat, careful script, the same handwriting on every birthday card and grocery list for 45 years. At the top were the words, "Eleanor's birthday, September 27th, 1951, the day I knew I'd marry her." And beneath that, a string of letters and numbers that made no sense. MH4529, CH090, Mundine EH. My breath caught in my throat. Robert had never mentioned a hidden compartment, never mentioned a code, and for a moment I felt a wave of anger that even after all our years together, he had kept secrets from me. "Do you know what it means?" Lenny asked, and I shook my head, the paper trembling in my hands. "Not yet, but I will." He gave me a look that was equal parts pity and respect, then said quietly, "The guy who bought the watch, he seemed real interested when I mentioned we'd found something inside. Didn't give his name, paid cash, but he asked if we'd opened it. Got real tense when I said no." A chill ran through me. Whoever this man was, he hadn't stumbled on Robert's watch by accident. He had been looking for it, waiting for it, and now he had it in his possession, along with whatever secret Robert had been hiding for decades. I walked back to my car, with the envelope clutched against my chest. The city sounds muffled like I was underwater, and all I could think about was how little I really knew about the man I had shared my life with. Robert had been meticulous, cautious, the kind of man who never carried a balance on his credit card and filed every receipt in color-coded folders. And yet here was proof he had a hidden life, one he never let me glimpse, not even when he knew his heart was failing. That night, I sat at his old oak desk in our bedroom. the one I hadn't had the strength to clear out since he passed, and spread decades of financial records across the surface. Bank statements, tax returns, investment accounts, all carefully filed in chronological order. I stared at the code until my eyes blurred. MH4529 CH0919EH. MH could be Manhattan, where Robert had worked briefly when he was young. Or maybe Midwest Holdings, a company he once consulted for. CH was Chicago, of course, the city where we'd built our life. 0919 was September 19th, our wedding anniversary. EH, those were my initials, Eleanor Hayes. My husband had left me a message, and it was tied to our life, our love, and me. I tried typing the code into our online bank accounts, into the old retirement fund portal, into everything I could think of, but nothing matched. At midnight, exhausted and trembling, I laid my head on the desk and sobbed. What had Robert been hiding? Why had he hidden it in the one object he knew Daniel would eventually try to take from me, and why did some stranger care enough to hunt it down? When the phone rang, I jumped so hard the paper slipped to the floor. It was Daniel. "Mom," he said, his voice casual but tight. "Madison told me you went to the pawn shop today. You embarrassed yourself. Why can't you just let this go?" My grief turned sharp like glass in my throat. "There was something inside the watch, Daniel. A message from your father." For a second there was silence, and then his voice changed. Urgent. Hungry. "What kind of message?" "Just numbers. Probably nothing important." I lied, because for the first time since Robert died, I realized my own son might not just be careless or selfish. He might be dangerous. "Maybe I should come over," Daniel pressed, "help you figure it out." And that was when I knew. Whatever Robert had hidden, Daniel wanted it, and I couldn't trust him. Not anymore. I didn't sleep that night. Not 1 minute, because every time I closed my eyes, I saw Robert's handwriting burned into my eyelids, those neat block letters that had filled our lives with grocery lists and love notes, and now, apparently, secrets. And I kept hearing Daniel's voice on the phone, sharp with interest, desperate in a way that made me feel like prey instead of his mother. And I knew with a clarity that terrified me that whatever Robert had hidden inside that watch was not meant for Daniel's hands. I spent hours going through Robert's files, page after page of meticulous record-keeping, rows of manila folders filled with tax returns, mortgage papers, retirement accounts, and I kept thinking about his last months, about how he'd been distracted, about how he'd started staying late at the office, telling me he had extra projects even though he was supposed to be winding down, and how I'd brushed it off as him trying to keep busy after retirement. Now I saw the truth. He had been preparing, planning, protecting me in ways I hadn't understood, maybe even from our own son. The code gnawed at me, taunting me like a puzzle I should have been able to solve. MH4529 CH0919H. I knew CH was Chicago. 0919 was our anniversary, and EH was me, Eleanor Hayes. But what was MH4529? I remembered Robert had once mentioned something about Midwest Holdings back in the 80s, a small investment group his cousin introduced him to, but I'd dismissed it at the time as a side project. Could it be connected? At 3 ins, the morning, desperate for answers, I pulled out my laptop and started searching. Midwest Holdings. The name popped up, but not as a company. It was a shell corporation dissolved in the late 90s. Buried in the search results was an old news clipping about a scandal about several companies in Chicago funneling money into offshore investments through Cayman Islands accounts, and my blood ran cold because the dates lined up perfectly with the years Robert had been quietly tucking away extra money from his consulting work. I thought about all the times I had patched Robert's work shirts, clipped coupons, cooked spaghetti 3 nights in a row because money was tight, and I felt the burn of betrayal cut through my grief. Had he been hiding money from me all along? Or had he been hiding it from Daniel? I leaned back in the chair, exhausted, and that was when I noticed a thin, leather-bound notebook at the very back of the drawer, wedged so tight against the wood I had to pry it loose. Robert's handwriting filled every page, columns of numbers, initials, notes, dates stretching back decades, and on the first page were the words, "For Eleanor, if she ever needs it." My breath caught as I turned page after page, realizing this was no ordinary notebook. It was a ledger, a record of secret accounts, property transactions, and investments, all tied to codes just like the one from the watch. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped it, because it dawned on me that Robert hadn't just been stashing a few hundred here and there. He had been building something massive, something he never told me about. Maybe because he was trying to protect me. Maybe because he didn't trust Daniel. The realization sent a chill through me. Because if Daniel had known about this notebook, if he even suspected what Robert had built, then stealing the watch wasn't about a trip to Italy or quick cash. It was about finding the key to everything Robert had hidden. And that meant my son hadn't just stolen from me. He had been hunting me. I closed the notebook, clutching it to my chest, and tried to steady my breathing. For the first time since Robert's death, I felt like I wasn't grieving a husband, but unraveling a mystery. And it terrified me, because Daniel's sudden interest, his insistence that he should help, wasn't about love or support. It was about control. The next morning, as sunlight crept through the blinds, my phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Madison. "Eleanor, please call Daniel. He's worried about you. You're not thinking clearly." My stomach twisted because Madison's fake sympathy was the same tone she used when she wanted something. Smooth, practiced, dripping with the kind of sweetness that makes your teeth ache. She was trying to reel me in, trying to make me feel small and confused, but I knew better. I ignored the message, made myself a cup of coffee, and sat at the desk with Robert's ledger again. The numbers matched nothing in our known accounts, but when I cross-referenced them with property deeds, I saw something shocking. Robert had been buying real estate, small lots, rundown houses, fixer-uppers, all across Chicago, then quietly selling them off. Each sale lined up with a deposit in one of the coded accounts, and as the years passed, the amounts grew larger and larger. By 2008, the deposits jumped into the tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands. My chest pounded as I realized what it meant. Robert had built a fortune, one he'd never told me about, one he'd hidden behind codes and compartments, and now a ledger meant only for me. But why? Why keep it secret? Why never tell me while he was alive? That question gnawed at me until the doorbell rang, startling me so badly I nearly spilled my coffee. When I peered through the peephole, my heart sank. It was Daniel. He was alone, standing stiffly in the morning light, his jaw tight, his hand tapping against his thigh like he was impatient or nervous. Against my better judgment, I opened the door. "Mom," he said, his eyes darting past me into the house, scanning like he was searching for something. "We need to talk." I stepped aside, letting him in, but every instinct screamed at me that I was letting the wolf into the sheep's pen. He sat at Robert's desk without asking, his eyes catching on the piles of papers, the open notebook, and I saw the hunger flicker in his gaze. "You've been busy," he said flatly. I swallowed, hard, sorting through your father's things. He leaned forward, his voice dropping. "Did you find anything? Any codes?" My heart stopped, but I forced myself to shake my head. "Just old bills, bank statements." He studied me for a long moment, then smiled without warmth. "Mom, you know I could help you. Investments, accounts, property. You shouldn't be dealing with that stuff alone. Dad would have wanted me to handle it." The way he said it sent ice through my veins, because it wasn't a suggestion. It was a warning. I forced a shaky smile and said, "Thank you, Daniel, but I can manage." He stood, his eyes narrowing, then leaned close enough for me to smell. The cologne Madison had probably picked out. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Mom. That watch wasn't the only thing Dad left behind, was it?" And in that moment, I knew, beyond any doubt, that my son wasn't going to stop until he got what Robert had hidden. After Daniel left that morning, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the picture frames on the wall, I sat down at Robert's desk and felt my whole body trembling, not just from fear, but from the terrible realization that my own son was circling me like a vulture, waiting for me to crumble so he could pick apart what Robert had left behind. And I knew in my gut that Robert had seen this coming, that he'd spent his last years planning for a moment like this, trying to shield me from the boy we had raised together, but who no longer resembled the child I once knew. I thought back to the private conversations Robert and I used to have late at night after Daniel had gone off to college, about how reckless Daniel could be with money, how he always wanted the newest car, the flashiest gadgets, how Madison encouraged his extravagance, and how Robert had quietly shaken his head and said, "Ellie, he's going to run himself into the ground if he doesn't learn restraint." At the time I had brushed it off as parental worry, but now, with Robert gone and Daniel pressing me for secrets he wasn't entitled to, I understood my husband's quiet anxiety had been more than that. It had been a warning. I opened Robert's ledger again, flipping through the pages of transactions, and found myself staring at the final entries, bold deposits marked emergency liquidation, the last one dated just 2 weeks before his death, a deposit of $40,000 labeled only with the word Sullivan, and my heart stopped because Sullivan was Madison's maiden name, not Hayes, not part of our family history, and it dawned on me that Robert had been tracking Daniel and Madison's business dealings, perhaps even their debts. My hands shook as I cross-referenced the addresses of properties Robert had sold in the last year, and my blood went cold when I realized nearly every buyer had been listed under a shell company with Sullivan in the title, meaning Daniel, had been quietly trying to consolidate Robert's assets under his own control. That night, unable to calm my racing thoughts, I logged into the computer and typed in the code again, this time on investment firm websites, on property databases, anywhere it might fit. And when I entered it on a discreet Cayman Islands investment portal I had found through a maze of old paperwork, the screen blinked to life and asked for a password. My heart hammered as I thought of Robert's note. Eleanor's birthday, September 27th, 1951, the day I knew I'd marry her. My fingers shook as I typed in 092251. For a moment, nothing happened, and then the page loaded, and there it was in black and white, an account balance of $2,734,890. Almost $3 million hidden away, money Robert had grown quietly while I thought we were just getting by. Money he had never mentioned once in 45 years of marriage. Money I now understood he had hidden not from me, but from Daniel. Tears blurred my vision as I stared at the screen, because all the nights I clipped coupons, all the mornings I made do with patched clothes, all the times Robert told me we couldn't afford something while secretly funneling money into this account, they all crashed down on me, mixing betrayal with relief and grief with fury. Why hadn't he told me? Why hadn't he trusted me with the truth? But as I clicked through the account history, I saw the deposits, steady and small for years, then larger, then massive, each one tied to property transactions Daniel had been involved with. And I realized Robert hadn't built this fortune alone. He had built it in the shadows of Daniel's greed, investing alongside him, anticipating his moves, protecting the money by keeping it invisible. And then, buried in a folder labeled Emergency Access Only, I found a letter addressed to me. My hands shook as I opened it. Robert's careful, script filling the page. "Ellie, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and Daniel has shown you what I feared he would become. I never wanted you to bear this burden, but I had to protect you. Our son has debts, dangerous debts, and he has been making inquiries about our estate, about power of attorney, even about nursing homes. I couldn't tell you because I knew how much it would break your heart, but I also knew I couldn't let him take everything we built together. This account is yours, legally protected, shielded from Daniel's reach. If he tries to come after you, contact Thomas Keller, the attorney, whose number is in the top drawer of my desk. He knows everything and has the documents ready to defend you. I'm sorry for the secrets, but everything I did was to keep you safe." I sobbed so hard the paper blurred because Robert had carried this burden alone, watching our son spiral into a man who would betray his own mother. And instead of burdening me with the knowledge, he had quietly built a fortress to shield me even after death. As I clutched the letter to my chest, my phone buzzed again, Daniel's name flashing across the screen. I didn't answer, but a voicemail came through, his voice sharp, impatient, almost frantic. "Mom, we need to talk. I know Dad left something, and I know you found it. Don't make this a fight. You can't handle it on your own." His words chilled me because they weren't the words of a son. They were the words of a predator circling prey. And in that moment, I understood fully what Robert had meant by danger. My son wasn't just careless. He was prepared to destroy me to get what he wanted. The next morning, I woke with a pounding in my chest, not from lack of sleep, though God knows I'd only managed a couple hours, but from the weight of knowing my own son was circling me like a shark, and that if I didn't take action soon, I could lose not just Robert's hidden fortune, but my home, my sanity, maybe even my freedom if Daniel really followed through with what Robert's letter had warned about. I pulled myself together, slipped on my long gray coat, and drove downtown to the address Robert had written in his note. Thomas Keller, attorney at law, a small brass plaque outside an old brick building near the Loop. The waiting room smelled faintly of leather and old books, and when I told the receptionist my name, she raised her eyebrows slightly and said, "Mrs. Hayes, Mr. Keller has been expecting you." My stomach flipped at those words, because it meant Robert had truly prepared for this moment, had planned out a path for me before he even took his last breath. When I stepped into Keller's office, he was already on his feet, a tall man with thinning hair and wire-rimmed glasses, holding out his hand warmly. "Eleanor, I'm so sorry for your loss. Robert spoke of you often, and he left very specific instructions in case in case this situation came to pass." The kindness in his voice cracked the wall I had built around myself, and I found tears running down my cheeks as I told him everything. The pawn shop, the code in the watch, the Cayman account, Daniel's sudden interest, the way he prowled through my house with eyes like a thief. Keller listened without interruption, his hands folded on the desk, and when I finished, he leaned back and sighed. Robert was a cautious man. He hired me 2 years ago to put together a defense package in case Daniel tried to have you declared incompetent. He was worried your son's gambling debts and reckless business decisions would eventually push him into desperate territory. I regret to say it looks like Robert's fears were justified. My heart sank, but also, strangely, I felt a thread of relief because it meant I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't just some paranoid old widow losing her grip. My husband had seen the danger too. Keller opened a large file folder and slid it across to me. Inside were documents. Bank statements tracing Daniel's loans from shady lenders, screenshots of online gambling accounts registered to his name, even transcripts of inquiries he had made with lawyers about power of attorney and elder care petitions. "This is all admissible in court," Keller explained. "If Daniel tries to move against you legally, we'll have him tied up in fraud and elder abuse charges before he can breathe. But Eleanor, you need to be prepared. He won't stop at legal pressure. He may try intimidation, manipulation. You must not give in." I sat frozen, staring at the evidence that my son, my flesh and blood, had already laid the groundwork to strip me of everything. I whispered, "He was my baby. I held him the night he was born. I sang him to sleep when he was afraid of thunderstorms." Keller's eyes softened, but his words were firm. "And now he is a man who sees you as an obstacle. Robert's plan was never to hurt Daniel, but to protect you. That must be your focus now." I left the office with the file tucked into my bag like a shield, but as I walked back to my car, I spotted a figure leaning against a lamppost. Daniel. My breath caught. He straightened as soon as he saw me, his mouth tightening. "So this is where Dad's secret lawyer is, huh?" he said, his voice low and cutting. My legs nearly gave out, but I forced myself to stand tall. "Daniel, why are you following me?" His eyes narrowed. "Because you're hiding something. Dad didn't leave me out of his plans, Mom. I'm his son. He wanted me to have what's mine." Rage flared in me, hot and fierce. "What's yours? Your father worked his whole life to provide for this family, and you sold his watch for plane tickets. Don't talk to me about what's yours." He stepped closer, so close I could smell the stale coffee on his breath. "You don't understand. I'm in deep, Mom. Madison and I, we owe money. Real money. If I don't pay it back, people will come after us." His voice cracked for just a moment, and I caught a glimpse of the boy I used to know, terrified and lost, but then his jaw hardened again. "Dad would have wanted me safe. You need to help me." My chest clenched, because despite everything, despite the betrayal, he was still my son, and hearing his desperation was like a knife to my heart. But then Robert's voice echoed in my mind. His letter, his warning. "Daniel has debts. Dangerous debts. He has been making inquiries about our estate. I couldn't tell you because it would break your heart." I swallowed the lump in my throat and said quietly, Robert wanted me safe, too. Daniel's face twisted, frustration boiling over, and he spat. You're just a stubborn old woman living in the past. You think you can handle Dad's fortune on your own? You'll lose it all, and then you'll come crawling back to me. With that, he turned and stalked away, his shoulders rigid with anger. I stood rooted to the sidewalk, my whole body shaking, because I knew now that this wasn't just about greed. It was about survival for him, and people who are desperate enough to survive are capable of anything. That night, back in my empty house, I sat with Robert's ledger open and Keller's file spread across the table, the silence pressing down on me like a weight. And I whispered out loud, Robert, I don't know if I can do this without you. The tick of the clock was the only reply, steady, relentless, like the beat of Robert's watch that was no longer mine. But then I remembered his words. Everything I did was to keep you safe. And I realized safety wouldn't come from hiding or hoping Daniel would change. Safety would come from being stronger than I ever thought I could be. 2 days after that confrontation on the sidewalk, I was in my kitchen making a pot of tea when the doorbell rang. And when I looked through the peephole, my stomach dropped because it wasn't just Daniel standing there, it was Daniel and Madison. Both of them dressed like they were headed to a boardroom. Madison in a sharp navy suit and heels that clicked on the porch. Daniel in a blazer he never wore unless he wanted to look respectable. And in that instant, I knew they weren't here. As family, they were here as predators. Against my better judgment, I opened the door but didn't invite them in, and Madison smiled that smile of hers that never reached her eyes. Eleanor, she said smoothly, we thought we'd stop by before heading downtown. We've been speaking with some people who are concerned about your well-being. My skin crawled at her tone. She sounded like a nurse gently suggesting a confused patient needed more rest. Daniel cleared his throat and added, Mom, this doesn't have to be a fight. You can sign some papers. Let us help you with Dad's accounts. We'll make sure everything's handled, and you won't have to stress about it anymore. My hands tightened around the edge of the door. Handled? I asked, my voice shaking but steady enough. You mean stolen? Madison's expression hardened. Now that's unfair. You're grieving, Eleanor. Everyone can see it. You've been making erratic decisions. Pawn shops, secret lawyers. People are starting to talk. I felt the blood drain from my face as her words landed, because I finally understood. She had been laying the groundwork, whispering to neighbors, telling relatives, creating the story that I was losing my mind. It explained why my sister-in-law hadn't called in weeks, why my church friends seemed awkward when I tried to chat after service, why even the librarian I worked with had been watching me like I might break down. Madison had been isolating me, step by step, preparing for this very moment. Daniel reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder. Mom, these papers just give me temporary power of attorney. It's for your own good. Once you've had time to grieve, we'll revisit everything. You won't lose anything. My chest burned with fury. Your father trusted me to handle his affairs for 45 years. I managed this household, paid every bill, kept food on the table, while he quietly built a fortune behind the scenes. Do you really think I can't manage without you? Daniel's jaw clenched, and for a moment the mask slipped. He looked like a cornered animal, desperate, ready to lash out. Madison, though, kept her voice smooth, coaxing. Eleanor, if you refuse to cooperate, Daniel may have no choice but to petition the court to have you declared incompetent. It's a messy process, but we're trying to avoid that. The threat hung in the air like poison. My hands shook, but I lifted my chin. Then you'd better prepare yourselves, because I will fight you every step of the way. Daniel slammed the folder down on the porch rail, his eyes flashing with rage. You don't understand what you're doing, Mom. You're going to ruin us. His voice cracked with panic, and suddenly I saw the fear underneath his anger. The gambling debts, the shady loans, the people he owed who wouldn't wait forever. He wasn't just greedy. He was desperate, drowning, and he was willing to drag me under with him. Madison grabbed his arm, her nails digging into his sleeve, and whispered harshly, Daniel, not here. She turned back to me, her smile back. In place, though, her eyes were sharp as knives. Think about it, Eleanor. We'll be back. As they walked down the steps, Madison glanced back, her voice dripping with venom. Stubborn old women don't last long when they're alone. The door closed behind them, and I slid to the floor, my whole body shaking, tears streaming down my face, because the people who should have been my family had declared war on me. That night, as I sat with Robert's ledger open and Keller's, files spread out in front of me, I realized there was no turning back. If Daniel and Madison were willing to drag me to court, to humiliate me, to strip me of my autonomy, then I had to strike first. I called Keller, my voice shaking, and told him everything. He was quiet for a long moment, then said, "Eleanor, Robert anticipated this. We have enough evidence to counter anything they throw at you, but I think it's time we go on offense. Daniel's gambling debts, his fraudulent loan applications, Madison's whisper campaign, if we present it all, they'll be facing not just a failed petition, but criminal charges." My breath caught. Criminal charges. The words felt heavy, like betrayal, layered on betrayal. To think that my son, my flesh and blood, might end up in court-facing prison because of what he had tried to do to me was almost more than I could bear. But then I thought of Robert, of the way he had spent his last years building this hidden fortress of protection, of the way he had trusted Keller to help me after he was gone. I thought of the way Daniel had looked at me in my own kitchen, like I was just a roadblock between him and his survival. And I knew Robert was right. I couldn't let sentiment blind me to the danger. That night, I prayed harder than I had in months, begging God to give me the strength to face what was coming. And when I finally drifted to sleep, I dreamed of Robert, standing in our old kitchen, winding his watch with that steady rhythm, his eyes meeting mine, full of reassurance. When I woke, I felt a strange calm settle over me. It was time to stop being afraid. It was time to fight back. The following week began like a storm I could feel in my bones long before the clouds rolled in, a heaviness in the air that told me something was about to break. And sure enough, on Tuesday morning, Keller called to say that Daniel's lawyers had officially filed a petition in probate court questioning my competency and requesting temporary power of attorney be transferred to him, which would have given him full access to Robert's hidden accounts and properties if the judge agreed. And though part of me wanted to collapse under the weight of it, another part of me burned with a fire I hadn't felt in years because I knew Robert had prepared me for this exact moment. I drove downtown to Keller's office with the file he had assembled already tucked under my arm, and as I sat across from him at that mahogany desk, he slid another thick folder toward me, this one labeled Defense Exhibit A. Inside were documents so damning it made my hands tremble. Copies of Daniel's gambling debts, screenshots of offshore betting accounts in his name, bank statements showing cash withdrawals that matched payments to shady lenders, even transcripts of phone calls Madison had made to my neighbors suggesting I was confused and forgetful, laying the foundation for their smear campaign. "This is elder abuse, Eleanor," Keller said firmly, his eyes locking on mine. "Not just manipulation, not just betrayal, it's abuse, and the court will see it that way." My heart cracked at the word because no mother ever wants to hear her child accused of abusing her, but I also knew it was the truth. And truth, no matter how painful, was the weapon Robert had left me. The first hearing was scheduled for Friday, and when I walked into that courtroom with Keller by my side, the fluorescent lights buzzing above us, I felt every pair of eyes turned toward me. Family members, neighbors, even people I didn't know, all whispering, and there at the petitioner's table sat Daniel and Madison, their posture stiff, their eyes cold, their expensive suits doing nothing to hide the rot underneath. Daniel wouldn't even look at me at first, but Madison did, her lips curling in a smile that was more like a dare. The judge, a stern woman with sharp eyes, called the court to order, and Daniel's lawyer launched into a speech about how I was overwhelmed by grief, how I had been making erratic financial decisions, and was susceptible to exploitation, painting me as some fragile old woman incapable of managing her own affairs. Each word felt like a knife, not because I believed them, but because they were coming from my own son's side, because he had chosen to stand in a courtroom and tear down the very mother who had given him life. When it was Keller's turn, he stood calmly, adjusted his glasses, and said, "Your Honor, the petitioner claims to be concerned for his mother's well-being. But what he fails to mention is that he himself has accumulated nearly $200,000 in gambling debts, that he has taken out fraudulent loans in his wife's name, and that he has been actively spreading false claims about his mother's mental state in order to isolate her from friends and family." He laid the documents out on the judge's bench one by one, each piece of evidence like a hammer blow, And when the judge's eyes narrowed at Daniel, I saw panic flicker across his face. Madison tried to mask it with a tight smile, but I could see the cracks forming. Then Keller did something I hadn't expected. He pressed play on a small recorder, and suddenly Daniel's voice filled the courtroom, captured by the recordings Robert had secretly installed in our house months before. His death. If Mom doesn't hand it over, we'll just get her declared incompetent. Madison, it's the only way. Gasps rippled through the courtroom, and I buried my face in my hands as tears streamed down, not from shame, but from grief at hearing my own son plotting against me in his father's home. When the tape ended, the judge leaned forward, her expression hard. "Mr. Hayes," she said, her voice cold, "this court does not take kindly to attempts at fraud or elder abuse. Unless you can provide evidence that outweighs what I have just heard, I suggest you reconsider your petition." Daniel's lawyer stammered, flipping through papers, but it was useless. The evidence was overwhelming, Robert's careful preparations now saving me in the most public of ways. The judge dismissed the petition on the spot and ordered an investigation into Daniel's financial dealings. I should have felt victorious, but as I left the courtroom, Madison brushed past me, her perfume sharp in my nose, and hissed, "This isn't over, Eleanor. You may have won today, but Daniel doesn't give up that easy." My knees almost buckled because I believed her. Desperate people don't stop when they lose one battle. They double down. That night, I sat alone at my kitchen table, Robert's watchless nightstand upstairs reminding me of everything I'd lost. And I thought about how my life had turned into a battlefield between love and betrayal, between a husband who protected me even after death and a son who would destroy me for survival. I whispered into the silence, "Robert, I hope you're proud of me. I hope I'm strong enough." And in the stillness, I thought I could almost hear the faint ticking of his watch, steady, patient, reminding me that the fight wasn't over. In the weeks that followed the courtroom hearing, my life became a blur of phone calls, meetings, and paperwork as Keller and his team worked tirelessly to turn Robert's evidence into formal charges, and every day felt like walking a tightrope between devastation and determination. Because while part of me wanted nothing more than to curl up in Robert's old chair and cry until there was nothing left, another part of me knew I had to stand tall, not just for myself, but for the years. Robert had spent building this fortress of protection around me, and if I crumbled now, it would mean everything he had sacrificed was for nothing. News spread quickly in our neighborhood, and for the first time in months, my phone began to ring with calls from friends and church members who had avoided me since Madison began her whisper campaign, their voices full of apologies as they admitted. She had convinced them I was slipping into dementia, that I was losing track of time and money, and though their words stung, I forgave them, because I knew how cunning Madison could be. But while I was regaining allies, Daniel and Madison were unraveling. The investigation uncovered not only Daniel's gambling debts, but fraudulent loan applications, tax evasion, and even falsified documents used to prop up their failing real estate company. Federal investigators began circling, and one crisp autumn morning, just as I was sipping coffee by the kitchen window, I saw black SUVs pull up to Daniel's house 2 blocks over, and agents in windbreakers carry boxes of records out the door. My phone rang almost immediately, Daniel's voice frantic, cracked, raw. "Mom, you have to help me, please. They're tearing everything apart. They're going to ruin me. I'll lose Madison, I'll lose the house, I'll lose everything." His sobs on the line were jagged, almost childlike, and for a moment I closed my eyes and saw him as a boy again, clutching my hand on the first day of school, terrified of being left alone. My heart ached, but then I remembered the recording in court, the way he had coldly said, "We'll just get her declared incompetent," and my sorrow hardened into steel. "Daniel," I said softly, "you ruined yourself?" He cried harder, his words tumbling out in gasps. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I just needed help. I thought Dad left me nothing. I thought you'd be fine without it." I almost broke then, almost told him I'd bail him out. But Robert's letter echoed in my mind, "Our son has debts, dangerous debts. Protect yourself." I steadied my voice. "Your father trusted me with his plan. He protected me from you, Daniel. That should tell you everything you need to know." And then, before he could answer, I hung up. The silence that followed was deafening, but it was also freeing, like I had finally cut the last rope binding me to his chaos. A week later, Keller called to tell me the state had formally charged Daniel with fraud and elder abuse, and Madison with conspiracy, that both faced prison time and restitution. And while I thought hearing those words would bring me satisfaction, all I felt was grief. Grief that the boy I had rocked to sleep, the teenager Robert had taught to drive, the man who should have been my comfort in old age, would now spend years behind bars. Yet, when I walked past the mirror that night, I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. Her eyes were swollen but fierce, her shoulders straight, her jaw set with resolve. She was no longer the widow sobbing into her hands at the kitchen table, powerless in the face of betrayal. She was Eleanor Hayes, wife of Robert Hayes, mother of a son who had broken her heart but not her spirit, guardian of a legacy built in secrecy and sacrifice. And as much as it pained me, I knew Robert had been right. Daniel had become a danger, and protection required hard choices. 6 months later, I stood in the lobby of the Chicago Children's Hospital, tears blurring my vision as a brass plaque was unveiled on the new research wing, the Robert and Eleanor Hayes Foundation, funded in honor of Robert Hayes by his loving wife, Eleanor. Robert's hidden fortune had not only secured my future but was now giving life and hope to children who needed it most. And in that moment, I realized this was what he had been working toward all along. Not just protection, but purpose. A legacy. Bigger than either of us. My phone buzzed with a message from Keller. Daniel accepted a plea deal. 5 years in federal prison, full restitution required. Madison took 18 months. Do you wish to attend the sentencing? I stared at the screen, then typed back simply, no. My chapter with them is closed. That evening, as the sun dipped over Lake Michigan, I sat on my back porch with Robert's ledger closed at last. The weight of it lifted, and I whispered into the twilight, "We made it, Robert. I survived. You kept your promise." The breeze rustled the trees, gentle, like an answer. I slipped on Robert's old wedding band that I wore on a chain around my neck and pressed it to my lips. Betrayal had broken me, but love had rebuilt me stronger. And though my son had tried to strip me of everything, he had only revealed the strength I never knew I had. If you're still listening, if you've ever been betrayed by someone you love, I want you to know you're not alone. Leave your story in the comments, subscribe if you believe voices like ours matter, because together we can remind the world that even in the face of heartbreak, even in the face of betrayal by those closest to us, dignity, love, and truth will always endure. And as the sky turned pink above me, I felt Robert's presence as surely as I felt the beating of my own heart. A quiet reminder that the greatest love stories aren't measured in years or possessions, but in protection. The kind that endures, even when the watch stops ticking, even when the man is gone, because the love remains.